I'm Caelum Derux, and this is Thinkhack, Better Living Through Psychology. Today's talk is about a question that too many are afraid to answer out loud. What happened to masculinity? Why are so many men today anxious, uncertain, apologetic, and yes, feminine? We are witnessing the rise of the beta male, not because testosterone has vanished, but because our culture has traded the warrior spirit for a polite smile. What we'll talk about today isn't about shaming softness, it's about understanding where the masculine center has gone, why so many men feel lost, and how to reclaim the grounded power they were born to carry. This is not nostalgia, this is a reckoning. Let's begin. The first truth we need to face is this: modern men are not being raised to be men. They're being raised to be agreeable, compliant, safe, digestible versions of what society tells them is good. But what is good now? Good means nice. Good means non-threatening. Good means soft-spoken and always apologizing. And in doing this, we've amputated their aggression, their assertiveness, their drive. We've told boys that leadership is toxic, that power is problematic, that their instincts are dangerous, and so they shrink. They sit quietly in classrooms designed to reward obedience. They internalize the belief that if they're strong, loud, or dominant, they're bad. And by the time they reach adulthood, they're shells of men. They're not rooted in purpose, they're floating in passivity. The rise of the beta male is not accidental, it's engineered. You have to understand something about energy. Masculine energy is meant to lead. It's meant to carve paths, break ground, protect, and provide. It's directional, it's focused. But when that energy is suppressed for too long, it doesn't disappear. It turns inward. It becomes self-loathing. It becomes indecision. It becomes resentment, depression, and chronic anxiety. Today, we have millions of men who don't know what it feels like to stand tall in their bodies. They don't trust their own voice. They ask permission to be themselves. And because they've never learned to fight for what they believe in, they fight against themselves. They're not weak because they want to be. They're weak because they were never taught how to be strong. And that's the tragedy. We've raised a generation of men who apologize for existing, who confuse passivity with kindness, who think being liked is more important than being respected. One of the greatest contributors to this shift is the erosion of masculine rites of passage. Historically, boys became men through fire, through hardship, through discipline, challenge, and accountability. There was always a moment, a trial, that forced them to grow. But today, that's gone. There's no moment, no line in the sand. Just a slow drift from teenage uncertainty into adult confusion. There's no father figure showing the way, no mentor guiding the storm. Boys are left alone, raised by overstressed mothers and numbed by endless screens. They learn emotional regulation from social media and masculinity from sitcoms. And what do those narratives tell them? That men are clowns, or villains, or fools. That masculinity is either a joke or a threat, and so they distance themselves from it. They overcorrect. They try to be better men by being less of a man, and the result is what we see today: softness without stability, sensitivity without strength. Let's talk about relationships for a moment, because nowhere is the rise of the beta male more apparent than in modern dating. You see it everywhere. Men who text paragraphs to women who ignore them, who rearrange their entire schedules to win approval, who abandon their principles to avoid conflict. They don't lead, they wait. They don't assert, they accommodate. And the irony, women don't respect it. Because deep down, no woman wants a man who's always available, always agreeable, always asking what she wants before he knows what he wants. Feminine energy does not desire a man who mirrors her. It craves one who anchors her. But when men are raised without masculine models, they default to feminized strategies, validation seeking, emotional reactivity, over-explanation, and then they wonder why they're overlooked. It's not because they're too nice, it's because they've traded their edge for acceptance. And the edge is where attraction lives. You might be asking, what's wrong with softness? What's wrong with men being emotionally open, kind, and connected? Nothing. In fact, those qualities are crucial, but without a spine, they're useless. Emotional intelligence without strength becomes insecurity. Kindness without boundaries becomes self-erasure. Connection without direction becomes chaos. What's missing in the modern man is not feeling, it's form. the masculine provides form. It creates safety, not through control, but through clarity, through groundedness. A man in his healthy masculine doesn't dominate, but he doesn't disappear either. He doesn't need to yell, but he's not afraid to be firm. He doesn't need to prove, but he's not afraid to walk away. That's the balance we've lost, and without it, we're raising men who can cry on command, but can't hold a boundary, who can write poetry, but can't commit to a mission, who can empathize, but can't protect. And that, my friend, is the crisis of our time. So how exactly did we get here? One major factor is the cultural war on masculinity itself. Over the last few decades, the narrative has shifted from promoting healthy masculine traits to condemning masculinity altogether. The term toxic masculinity went from describing genuinely destructive behavior to branding all expressions of masculine energy as suspect. Men were told not to be aggressive, assertive, stoic, or competitive. And when you strip a man of these core expressions, not through self-awareness, but through social pressure, you don't get peace. You get confusion. You get a man who doesn't know how to be, who questions his instincts, who feels ashamed of his impulses. This cultural rewriting has not created emotionally intelligent men, it's created emotionally paralyzed men. Men who overthink every word, who second-guess every move, who live in fear of offense, not out of compassion, but out of fear of rejection. And that fear, it emasculates them from the inside out. Another contributing factor is the complete absence of strong male mentorship. In traditional cultures, boys were not raised by mothers alone. They were initiated by men. They saw male strength, discipline, and guidance modeled consistently. But in the modern world, fatherless homes are the norm. Even when fathers are present, they're often emotionally absent, overworked, or disconnected. So boys turn to the next available models, celebrities, influencers, or worse, porn. They learn sex from pixels, confidence from rap videos, and purpose from motivational memes. But none of these things provide the embodied presence of a real man saying, stand up straight, speak with conviction, take responsibility. Without those voices, boys try to become men through mimicry, not maturity. They dress the part, say the right words, but crack under pressure because there's no inner foundation, no masculine anchor forged through mentorship, struggle, and earned wisdom. Let's also talk about emotional training, because one of the most dangerous lies men are sold today is that vulnerability is the same as weakness. In an attempt to combat stoicism gone wrong, we've swung the pendulum too far. We now tell men that their strength is found only in their wounds. That crying is power, that collapsing is truth. But vulnerability without structure leads to emotional chaos. A man must be able to feel deeply without being ruled by his emotions. That is what makes him masculine. Not the absence of feeling, but the discipline to carry those feelings without falling apart. And yet, so many men today lack that discipline. They've been taught to express, but not to regulate, to open up, but not to integrate. So they become emotionally needy, reactive, dependent. And instead of becoming men who can protect, guide, and lead, they become emotional mirrors, constantly seeking reassurance, constantly draining the women they claim to love. And speaking of women, let's be honest, many modern women are frustrated, not because they hate men, but because they can't find one. They're surrounded by boys in men's bodies, men who are emotionally codependent, physically unmotivated, spiritually empty, men who have no mission, no backbone, no standards. And it's not that women are too demanding, it's that the bar has dropped so low that basic masculine traits now feel rare. A man who makes decisions, holds boundaries, knows who he is, that man is now the exception, not the rule. And so women harden. They step into masculine roles, not because they want to, but because they have to. And what follows? The polarity collapses, attraction dies, relationships dissolve, and we wonder why divorce rates skyrocket and hookup culture thrives. It's not because love is dead, it's because masculinity is missing, and without it, relationships lose their structure, their tension, their vitality. Now, let's address the obvious question: what's the solution? It's not swinging back to outdated models of macho dominance. It's not suppressing emotions, flexing in the mirror, or pretending that strength means silence. No, The solution is integration. A new kind of man must emerge, one who blends depth with direction, sensitivity with strength, emotional availability with emotional resilience. That man isn't afraid to lead. He isn't afraid to be disliked. He doesn't compromise his values to gain approval. He walks in his purpose, owns his power, and connects from wholeness, not from need. He doesn't whine for love. He attracts it by being anchored. And here's the catch. That kind of man can't be raised by culture. He must be forged by choice. He must go against the grain. He must build himself. Because in a world trying to soften him, sedate him, and shame him, he must reclaim his spine, his balls, and his sacred masculine edge. You see, reclaiming masculinity isn't about domination, it's about sovereignty. A man must govern his mind, his time, his urges. He must know what he stands for, and more importantly, what he will not tolerate. The beta male, the overly feminized man, often operates from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of loneliness, fear of not being enough. And so he bends, constantly adapting, constantly performing. He trades authenticity for acceptance. But a man in his power doesn't bend. He chooses. He doesn't chase. He evaluates. He doesn't whine. He decides. That's the shift. That's the inner recalibration required. Not louder voices, not bigger muscles, deeper roots. The new masculine isn't reactive. He's rooted, and in that rootedness, he finds peace. A peace so powerful, so grounded, that no rejection, no crisis, no disapproval can shake it. Because when a man knows who he is, the world can no longer tell him who he's supposed to be. Let's also talk about brotherhood, because part of the reason men stay stuck in beta energy is isolation. They're disconnected from other men. They're surrounded by feminine energy, mothers, teachers, bosses, girlfriends, but rarely challenged by masculine peers who hold them accountable, and so they fumble through manhood alone, with no iron to sharpen their edge. This is why men need men. Not to bond over beer and football alone, but to be called higher, to be seen by someone who won't let them shrink, to be reminded that their softness is beautiful, but only when backed by strength. A man without brotherhood is vulnerable. He's more likely to fold under pressure, lose himself in relationships, and seek validation through performance. But a man with strong, grounded brothers, he stands taller, he remembers his worth, and most importantly, he evolves. Because masculinity is not a solo journey, it's a sacred alliance. So what can the individual man do? How does one rise from beta to sovereign, from reactive to rooted? It begins with a choice to stop outsourcing your identity, to stop letting women, media, and fear dictate who you are. You start by reclaiming your mornings, your body, your discipline. You get strong, not for approval, but because your body is your temple. You learn to lead, not to control, but because your family, your mission, and your soul need direction. You speak less and say more. You listen deeply, but compromise only when it honors your truth. You sit with your pain instead of projecting it. You master your emotions instead of denying them. And day by day, you become dangerous, not to others, but to every version of yourself that was scared to be fully alive. Because in this world, the most dangerous thing a man can be is real. And as you rise, you'll see the world differently. You'll stop resenting women. You'll stop blaming society. You'll stop needing constant validation. Because you'll realize that power was never about control. It was about clarity. The beta male looks for permission to exist. The sovereign man simply exists, fully, quietly, unapologetically. And from that state, he builds, he leads, he loves. Not to be liked, but because it's who he is. That is the kind of man women crave, children respect, and other men admire. Not because he's the loudest, richest, or strongest, but because he's anchored. His value doesn't fluctuate with opinions. His presence is felt without performance. That is masculinity, not a costume, not a posture, but a presence that cannot be shaken. So to every man listening, this is your call. The world doesn't need more noise, it needs you in your highest form. Not the version that seeks approval, but the one that remembers who he is. The beta rise was not your fault, but your awakening is your responsibility. No one will hand you back your spine. You must forge it. No one will teach you how to lead. You must practice it. No one will respect you for trying to be liked. but they will honor you for being real. So reclaim your edge, rebuild your body, refine your mind, and remember, the feminine doesn't want a man who agrees with everything. She wants a man who knows himself, and when you become that man, you'll find that you don't need to chase power because you are power, silent, steady, sovereign.